Hello, I'm Jennifer Thompson.
And I'm Chad Thompson.
And we are your hosts of The Premise, where we get to the story behind the storyteller. And this season 4, that's right, we're in season 4. We've got some amazing storytellers lined up, and we really appreciate you listening. Be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Let's roll.
Autobots, roll out!
Hello and welcome to The Premise. Here we are, another episode with a phenomenal author, podcaster, adventurer, and just crazy all-around badass lady, Shelby Stanger. Welcome to The Premise.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to talk to a fellow author who's also like a badass rock climber.
I don't know if I'm a badass, but I'm definitely a rock climber.
You go.
And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, let's do it.
I love it. I love it. So let me tell our readers a little bit about you. Shelby Stanger is the host and creator of the hit podcast Wild Ideas Worth Living, an REI Co-op Studios production. Over the years, her work has appeared everywhere from Outside Magazine to ESPN, and she has spoken to organizations like the Girl Scouts of America, NPR, and Creative Mornings, also chasing adventure herself. Shelby has surfed from Canada to Costa Rica, sandboarded. I don't even know what that is. I can't wait to find out. I have a feeling it's riding a surfboard on the sand. Am I right?
Pretty much, or a snowboard.
Okay,
or
cool,
a boogie board.
Okay, any board that will go on sand. I love it. That's probably something I could do. I'm terrified of the ocean. But anyway, sandboarded down desolate dunes in Cape Town. Oh, I just needed to keep reading. Paddled down a remote portion of the Amazon River, so many bug bites, and interviewed countless CEOs, athletes, activists, and thought leaders. She regularly consults with highly motivated individuals and brands to help them tell better stories and even launch their own podcasts and wild ideas. Again, Shelby, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to a fellow adventurer and writer, book lover.
Reading this book. Yeah, we are each other's people, I'm convinced, because I read your book, so I know. Reading this book was so much fun, and it made me want to like blow up my life and like move back into a van.
Yeah, back.
Chad and I have done that a couple times. We've blown up our lives a couple times. We'll probably talk about that today. But I want to talk about you. So your book begins with you're stalling on a surfboard off the coast of Southern California, and you're afraid to take a big wave. But really, it's a metaphor for your life and taking changes and chances, acting on your wild idea. Can you tell us about your wild idea and what made you finally act on it? Not just the wave, but we want to hear that, but also the life you chose for yourself.
Well, I wanted to be an adventure storyteller. On paper, that made zero sense. It was the height of the 2009-10 recession, 2008-9 recession, and I had this dream job. I had talked myself into a job first as a journalist for the Vans Warped Tour, which was a punk rock concert series that went to 60 cities in 60 days, and I wrote these daily stories, and it was awesome. But then the only real adventure job I could get writing at the time, I'd pitched the New York Times, I pitched the LA Times, I pitched the Union Tribune, I pitched all these papers like, hey, I want to just write about adventure. And there wasn't like this full-time job for it. But someone said, even a guy at the LA Times, the head editor in chief, was like, talk to Vans. And I had a relationship with Vans. I got myself a job as the first female journalist for this punk rock concert series, where I had to send my stories up through a dial-up connection every day, which meant I needed to find a dial-up connection.
Right. Awesome.
Possible. But fast forward, I was working in marketing essentially, and I love marketing. I love Vans, but I didn't love the commute. At the time, you couldn't work from home. And I had like this strict schedule when my brain works really well in the morning. And then like in the afternoon, it kind of shuts off. And then late at night, it kicks in again. And I just wanted to write, and it made no sense. So essentially, I needed to drop in on life and make this decision that made no sense on paper. But there was also this wave in front of my house where I was living in Laguna Beach. it was called Rock Pile, which is so ironic because in San Diego, I live in front of a break also called Rock Pile.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's kind of cool.
And in Solana Beach, in Laguna Beach, this wave, to catch it, you had to take off between two rocks. And if you didn't time it right, you could hit the rock. And it was terrifying. And it's not terrifying to super experienced surfers. But at the time, I was kind of a weekend warrior. Even though I grew up teaching surfing, I taught surfing at La Jolla Shores, which is this gentle, dreamy beach break in La Jolla, California. And it wasn't like Rock Pile. So the day I finally caught this wave at Rock Pile, I just felt totally different. I gained courage. And I think that's the thing about adventure is that doing something scary outside in nature where all of our senses are expanded and we're connected to things like awe, which takes us out of our head and makes us feel small yet connected to other people at the same time, changes us. And I wouldn't say that wave changed everything. There had been some other moments that was building up to that for about 2 years. But that's the day I was like, I'm doing it. I'm going to give notice to my boss. I'm going to pursue journalism full time. And at the time, I'd been freelancing on the side at night and trying to write for magazine. I landed one story in Outside Magazine. And at the time, I was like, okay, that's a prestigious enough outdoor adventure magazine that if I say I have a clip in Outside, I could get clips in other places. And so I also got courage doing that. But I think for me, the catalyst was dropping into a wave. And in doing so, I had to drop into my life and live more intentionally and take risks. And it's funny because, Jennifer, the day I decided to give notice to quit my job, I got a call. And I don't know how these things in life happens, but sometimes when you make a decision with your heart, the universe aligns. And it doesn't always happen. There was a lot of decisions I was making at the time where the universe was telling me like red light, stop, like putting me in traffic where a semi truck overturned on the 101 in LA, making me realize I was literally stuck as well. But on this day, the day I gave notice, I got a phone call immediately from a PR person I told I was thinking about quitting my job to pursue adventure journalism full time and to think of me if she had story ideas. It was to go to Indonesia to surf with a group of 10 guys who were going to be the first to stand up paddle these remote waves off these islands in Indonesia called the Mentawais. And I talked to myself as, you know, a female journalist. They wanted a guy to cover it. It was a group of guys. I was like, listen, I can hang. I'm not going to hit on these guys. I want nothing to do with these older men at the time. Now I'd be like pretty stoked to go on a boat trip with all older men. But anyways, then I was pretty young. And so I went on that trip. And I think that trip, the adventure of that trip catapulted me with courage for the next 10 years.
Wow.
So
yeah.
I'm sure you're a rock climber. Like there's nothing like climbing up a rock or even going to a rock climbing gym. It's a sport where you fail and fall a lot.
Yeah.
But eventually you get more comfortable failing. So the trying gets easier and then you have more success. But I was one of these perfectionists that was really afraid of failure growing up. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate because they're writers and readers, and a lot of writers and readers tend to be slightly perfectionists. And that was hard to shake, but adventure helped me shake it a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. It grounds you in a way that nothing else does. I always say there's no falling in climbing, by the way.
Well, that's true. I meant like I go to a bouldering gym and I guess I fall a lot there, but I mean, or if I even go to like Mesa Rim where I'm tied in by ropes and do top line climbing, if I fall, I have a harness, I'm connected. I'm not free soloing ever, but you do make mistakes a lot. And that's the only way you can get to a higher level. Yeah.
Well, the thing about climbing too is that first fall, I mean, I kid when I say there's no falling in climbing. Although recently I took a girlfriend out to some boulders and she was like, she'd never bouldered. She'd only climbed on a rope. And she said, well, what happens if I fall? And I said, well, you don't fall. There's no falling in climbing. She just looked at me like, and she fell. But the thing about it is that first fall makes you realize, oh, it's okay. You know, I'm not afraid of this anymore. I'm going to live through it. It's going to be fine. I might scrape my elbow, but you know, it's going to be fine. And there's just something about taking that step over that threshold that allows you to keep going. And it's such a beautiful thing.
I think surfing is the same way. It's funny because when I was a young woman, as a teenager, I taught surf lessons at Surf Diva, and I taught all through my 20s. But I remember even as a teen, women would come, they would learn to ride a few waves over a weekend or week-long clinic. And then shortly after, this was like, the late 90s, early 2000s, I'd get a phone call and someone would call me saying, "Hey, Shelby, I quit my job," or "I ended my relationship that was really not serving me for good this time," or something like, "I'm moving across the country by you to a place with a better beach." And
Wow.
I think I was so intrigued by the phenomenon of people being able to make a change after for me, that was a small adventure, taking a weekend surf clinic. But for them, it was really big, especially when there weren't tons of surf schools back then. And I inadvertently kind of made it my life's work to study why adventuring in nature specifically could be a catalyst for someone to change their life.
And I think that's what I love most about your book is, you interview, well, first of all, for our listeners, it's a combination of memoir, inspiration, but it's also action items and pro tips on how to get out of your head and get out into life, whether that's outside or going on a walk or whatever. But your book breaks down tips. You don't have to go climb Mount Everest. You can do something smaller, but getting out into nature and connecting with nature, connecting with your heart is so huge. And you make it seem possible at any level. And I love that about your book and how you combined so many big ideas, if you will, wild ideas, if we will. I have a question. Did it start out as a memoir, or did it start out more as an inspirational book as to how to achieve and go after your wild idea?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I had a memoir that I'd been trying to write since I was 25.
Mm-hmm.
And was probably too chicken to write it at the time because, like many people, there's too many people still alive to write what I want to write. But also, I had this podcast I'd started about wild ideas, and I'd been doing talks about it. And I was like, okay, one day I'll write this big memoir. But right now, this is the most important thing to me. I want people to connect with nature. And I think we all saw during the pandemic that that was the one place we could connect and could heal. And all of us had our mental health affected just by life in the last couple of years. I've never seen such a high anxiety rate. It's like the great anxiety right now, not the great depression. It feels like, at least.
Totally. Well said.
And our times in nature can ground us, heal us. I mean, there's so many studies. In nature, our blood pressure often decreases, our nervous systems relax, our immune system boosts, we're able to make better decisions. I mean, there's even a study that was published in 2019 that said that even 20 minutes of nature a day, as opposed to walking outside in a city, can reduce cortisol, which is our stress hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really wanted to get this book into the world. And I always wanted a guidebook of how to do it. How do you get unstuck and actually go make this decision that makes zero sense on paper? And there was nothing like it. There's all these adventure books that glorify the finish line and say, climb Everest. And frankly, I'm never going to climb Mount Everest. I mean, someone just invited me to go to base camp and I was like, really? I think I'm going to have to say yes. But I have no desire. I don't like being cold. It's expensive. It's just not something I want to do. I also don't want to ride my bike from Alaska to Mexico. I don't even really want to ride my bike from the edge of Tijuana back to my house in Solana Beach. I'm cool with small adventures. They do as much for me as probably big adventures do for some people. I don't need a lot, I need a little. And a little goes a long way. So I wanted a book that had everything I wanted to read in a book. I love books that are easy to read. It's not like America's great literary novel. It's written in really plain English. There's slang, and I was okay with that. I wanted how-to tips. So if I was just in a rush, I could skim through and look at the pages that I wanted to read.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hear stories of a mix of people. And yes, telling my story was the easiest, obviously, because I relate to my own story the best. But I wanted to show people, a 55-year-old who became an ice climbing guide, at 55, even though she'd been a suburban mom. And I wanted to show this person who became an outdoor drag queen and someone who is a body positive runner that definitely didn't fit the stereotype of a runner before. And I wanted to showcase older people who were adventuring and learning to surf at 85, and even the boogie board grandmas who, started boogie boarding a couple times a week up to age 96. And so I also wanted to show a range of adventures that were really small, like a guy who started drawing outside and it completely changed his life. And he became this famous TikTok star to like a couple who wanted to grow organic food and start a farm, which became their wild idea and led to movies and book deals and so much more, but mostly just to happiness. And maybe happiness isn't the right word, because I think it's more that we achieve a sense of connection and we learn to wonder a little bit more and to feel. So like one of the things was the finish line. Like that was really important to me. Adventure books glorify finish lines. And I've interviewed so many adventurers, and a lot of them experience post-adventure depression or fatigue. And some of that's literally scientific. Like you get this boost of dopamine that you no longer have because you're not climbing a mountain every day. Even people who hike the Pacific Crest Trail, like they have this giant sense of purpose where every day you hike a certain amount of miles, you set up your tent and you get food, and your life is not easy, but it's pretty simple. It's down to the basics. And I think after having certain adventures like that, there's a bit of a readjustment period. And so I wanted to showcase how at the end of a big adventure, you can give yourself grace at the finish line. And that it's not always glorious, but that for the rest of your life, you have that adventure in you. It's funny. There's a guy who owns a rock climbing gym in San Diego, and they're also in Brooklyn. They're in Washington State, and they're called Vital Climbing Gyms. And his name is David Satcher. And when he was 19 years old, he biked from the top of Alaska down to Patagonia. And it was crazy because he'd never had a bike with clip-in pedals. He'd never really camped before. He just really wanted to do it. And he had no idea what he was going to do for his career.
He needed your chapter on planning for sure.
Well, yes, he had no plan. He just kind of started, which is okay. I probably should have said in that planning chapter, you can also just go. And he said that trip formed a diamond in his soul. And it's like something that he takes with him to the rest of his life. And in business, it really helped him because he came up with this idea to start a community-based climbing gym that was open 24 hours a day, where kindness was a huge factor and everybody was welcome. And it would feel more like you're hanging out with friends, barbecuing and climbing every day at this climbing bouldering gym. And I've been to Vital climbing gyms and they feel really welcoming. It's really cool. And, he said when he pitched this idea originally at like age 20 or 19, whenever he got back, maybe 20, to investors, they were much more likely to say yes and give him money because here was a guy who said he was going to do something hard and he did it. But also he wasn't afraid of things like asking for money, like figuring out how to lease a building, make a rock climbing gym. I mean, there's a lot of things I would be afraid of to start a rock climbing gym. But I think after doing something really scary out in the wild, in nature, where so many of your senses are engaged and you're so connected to yourself, you start to get less scared.
Yeah.
And Jeniffer, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm a really scared person. And I actually did write about it in the book and some of it got cut out. But like I grew up with a lot of sudden death and a lot of fear of just like dying.
Yeah.
Because my dad died young when I was a little girl. I happened to be the fourth child of 3 women. So my 2 sisters were born, and then there was a son who died of sudden infant death syndrome at 8 months. And after I was born, and my mom was really scared I was going to die when I was born because, she just lost her son. And I asked her this year, actually, after writing the book, I'm like, Mom, why do you think that like I have such a hard time making decisions and I waver until I make them? And she's like, I think you just grew up around a lot of fear because I'm also not afraid of things. Like I'm not afraid to do adventurous things, but I'm afraid to make decisions. And so if I do something adventurous, then I can make that decision.
You know what's interesting about that is I think when we push ourselves past that threshold, something really magical happens. For example, if I'm climbing, if I'm leading outside in a situation that, you could die. If you mess up and make a mistake, you could literally die. If I'm on an easy climb, and by the way, I rank climbing in this way: 5 fun or 5 easy, 5 fun, 5 hard.
I love it.
So let's say I'm on a 5 fun climb or even a 5 easy climb. I get inside my head and I start getting fearful, right? Because I have time to stop and think about it and think to myself.
The person belaying it is infinitely frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating for me. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with me? This is an easy climb. I should just do it. But I have time to think about it. If I'm on a 5 hard climb, I don't have time. I got to get through it. These are crimpers. All I think about is that next piece, getting that next piece secure in a crack or whatever I'm climbing. And I find that fascinating in life. We get inside our heads and we're so anxious about something bad happening that we don't allow ourselves to just concentrate on that end goal and get through it. And it's a state of meditation in a lot of ways, because when you're so focused on accomplishing that thing that nothing else has time to come into your purview, that is such a beautiful place to be. And it's not only magical, it's life-changing. Just like meditating, when you're done, you see the world differently. The things that scared you in business or in relationships or, making change just seems like, I got this. It's like clearing the slate makes room to make better decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think adventure is, in nature, it's the perfect place to cultivate awe, flow.
Totally.
And you're demanded to be in the present moment. It's hard to sit and meditate.
Yeah.
But if you're surfing a wave,
yeah,
you have to focus. Or if you're climbing a rock wall or hiking on a ledge, you have to focus or you do fall.
And Exactly.
I think what's also so cool is all of our senses are so heightened and engaged. I mean, that's why I have a friend who puked the minute he got back to the city after a long camping trip, because the smell was just so overwhelming of the city compared to nature. But also, in nature, our perspective broadens. Like, it's why we're so drawn to the tops of mountains and looking out on the ocean at horizons. I think we're expanded in such a broad way than we can ever expand inside 4 walls indoors. So I also think one of the other great things I love about nature is, well, one, awe. Like, awe is a really good pattern interrupter. You could have been having a bad day at work, or you could have been sitting in traffic, or you could have fought with your partner. And, the other day I went and surfed with some girlfriends at Black's, and we were complaining about how crowded it was. And just like someone was complaining about their kid. And I was like, I looked up, and we looked up at the hills, and they were covered with wildflowers. And California has never looked this good as it looks right now.
Seriously.
It's springtime right now. The hills, emerald green. There were blue flowers. Out in the distance, there was this insane blue ocean. And all of us stopped and we were like, this is beautiful. And then we couldn't help but be positive. And I think awe happens when you see an eagle swoop down and grab a snake, or a dolphin leap. So much of life is predictable right now. But in nature, there's so many parts of life that are not predictable, which means there's so many more places to experience the magic of awe, which is such a great feeling to experience.
Absolutely.
And I love it.
There's this part in your book where you're talking about being in Costa Rica, and you smell better, you hear better, you see greater distances, and how, all of your heightened senses are aware and present. Really, I think it's about being present, right?
I think so. I mean, but also, when you hear these, it's wild. I'll go to Costa Rica and then I come back to San Diego and I'll start hearing birds here better, because the birds there are so wild. They're so loud. There was this bird that was sitting in front of I did 2 weeks in Costa Rica at a writer's, what do you call this? A residency. I didn't even know such a thing existed. So if you're a writer listening to this podcast, maybe you knew about this, but there are places all over the world that will hook you up and let you stay for pretty much free or a reduced cost while you work on your craft. And somehow I landed this thing in Costa Rica where I got to do this. It was amazing. This was like a secret to all writers. that I learned about. It was incredible. But there was this bird at 4 a.m. that's it's not a rooster, but it sounded like an alarm clock. Like, I'm pretty sure they modeled alarm clocks after this bird. And I looked it up. It was called like the alarm clock bird.
Oh, wow.
And it was just so funny. I was like, well, I guess I'm starting my writing at 4 a.m. But that sound, like, I would start to hear other birds, and I could hear the difference between birds because there's so many different ones. And now at home in San Diego, I can hear the difference between like a dove or a blue jay. I never could have told you the difference between, I could have cared less about birds before. But yeah, it's pretty cool. Your senses definitely heighten.
Watching birds is one of my favorite pastimes. Just being out in nature when I'm not feeling, if I'm feeling off. We're lucky we live at Mount Helix, and there's so much nature here and so many like trails that make you feel like you're out of the city, and yet we're just right off the 8. But when we bought this house, I was like, is this the right decision? So I said to Chad, by the way, Chad, my co-founder here at The Premise, also my husband, when we were going to buy this house, I said, okay, we have to go sit in front of the house and listen. And if we hear a lot of birds, then we'll buy the house. And
that's a great parameter, buying a house.
And we did. And there were so many birds that day. There were so many hummingbirds and crows and hawks and I don't know, everything. I was like, okay, we're buying this house.
No alarm clock birds, though.
Thank goodness. Although that sounds kind of cool. I like that. I remember being in South Park. Before here, we were in South Park, and there's a bird there. Which bird is it, Chad? I'm trying to blank. That makes noise at night, sings at night. And a friend of mine came from Portland, Oregon, and she's like, you guys have like the weirdest birds. Why are they singing at night? They're supposed to be sleeping. I was like, well, it's just how they roll here, how they fly here. But yeah, birds are like, we need to pay more attention to what they have to say, I think.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. I agree. We should go bird watching and then climbing.
Let's do it. In fact, one of my favorite runs, I don't run anymore because I have hip problems, but I used to be a big trail runner. And one of my favorite trails is up off of Manchester.
Is that San Elijo?
The San Elijo.
Oh, yeah. I run that almost at least once a week.
I used to run it every day. I used to manage a flower store in La Jolla, and I would drive in traffic up to the San Elijo. I'd start at the college there and run all the way to the beach.
Did you manage Adelaide's?
No, it wasn't Adelaide's. It was called Diva Flowers and the La Jolla Basket, or the Flower Basket. So one was at the Genesee and the other was in UTC.
How fun.
That was in the 90s. Yeah.
Great gig.
In fact, when I discovered rock climbing, I quit that job and moved to Yosemite.
What? That's so cool. And is that when you guys lived in a van?
Well, that was before I met Chad.
Oh.
So I was managing flower stores.
This was BC.
Before
Chad.
So you were a girl in Yosemite, single and rock climbing?
I was.
You must have slayed.
It was pretty awesome. It was pretty awesome. When I first discovered rock climbing, it changed my life because I was in the same position you were. Like, I thought I had to be someone specific in order to be taken seriously as a female. I wanted to be an anchor. I wanted to be a television anchor and a journalist. And the first time I climbed, it's actually kind of a funny story. I've never been on a rock outdoors, and I hadn't been like camping or anything since I was a child. I was all about the city life in San Diego. So a girlfriend of mine took me climbing for the day with her then new boyfriend, climber. And I've got my helmet on, I've got my harness on, and the guy who's showing me doesn't have a rope on. He's just kind of standing on the rock next to me, right? And he's like, okay, put your finger here and step here and do this. And I'm like, okay. So I'm about halfway up, maybe 30 feet up, and I make the mistake of looking down.
Oh.
Now, I think I forgot to mention, I am terrified of heights. There was a time when I was on a very not steep trail, and I got so afraid that I sat down and cried for them to call the fire department because I couldn't get up and I couldn't go any farther because the cliff was there. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. So terrified of heights. So I looked down and I'm like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? But then I looked up and I saw the trajectory of the rope and Paul, and I thought, if I fall, I'm going to swing and I'm going to bump into him and he's going to fall and he's going to die. So I have to finish this climb. Terrified, I get to the very top and he says, okay, turn around, sit in this alcove. And and just relax while I manage the rope, and then we'll rappel down. I'm like, okay, I cannot wait to get off this climb, right? It's the most terrifying, awful thing I've ever done in my life. I'm never going to do this again. Turn around. And I look out. We had hiked maybe 1,000 feet up. So this is an Idlewild, by the way. And I look down at the valley, which is way below. And I'm above the tree line. And all of a sudden, this crow comes by, speaking of birds and signs. And he's like on the wind and just sort of like stops in front of me. All time, all sound, everything just stops. But the bird is like moving silently. And I just had this euphoric moment where I was like, oh my God. And my eyes saw the world differently. And then the bird flies off. And then I look at Paul and we wrap down. And that day we get back to their house. I'm on the couch, asleep, exhausted, mentally, emotionally. I'm excited. And my friend says, what were you dreaming about? And I was like, oh, I think I was climbing a crack. And she's like, yeah, I could tell because your fingers were doing this weird motion. And like, it's like you were climbing in your sleep. I'm like, oh my God, I totally was. A week later, I had quit my job and borrowed camping equipment, got myself a pair of shoes and a harness, and I just went to Yosemite.
Wow. That's so cool. And I'm sure it helped you become a writer in so many ways.
Well, it helped me realize who I was, that I wasn't the trajectory of being successful, and making it in society's terms changed. I was here for a different purpose. And yeah, I think it did help me become a better writer, but really it connected me to nature. It connected me to myself. And it was a turning point in my life. And then soon thereafter, I did meet Chad. And we did move into our vehicle and we traveled around the country. And we worked for a magazine, actually. We worked for a climbing magazine or a cycling magazine.
Yeah.
Chad's a cyclist.
I love that. I think that adventure connects us to love. Sometimes
absolutely.
Love partner,
yeah.
Even. I mean, I met my own partner. I think it's so great that you two met shortly after that journey. I also met my partner, shortly after deciding to move to Costa Rica after I quit my job, which seemed like a crazy decision because I'd gone to Emory for journalism school. I know you'd gone to San Diego State for journalism school. And I was like, wow, am I throwing this all away to go teach surfing in Costa Rica? But I realized I could actually write from there. I even wrote an article in Spanish for the local newspaper. But it was there when I wasn't chasing guys any longer that I was surfing. And Johnny, who I'm still with 12 years later, was out in the water. And it was really interesting. I think, I have a friend who's a nature writer, and she wrote this book called How to Suffer Outside. And she said something that has really stuck with me. She said, her name is Diana Helmuth, and she said, nature doesn't give a shit about you. So you're forced to give a shit about yourself.
Wow.
And
that's
I love
cool.
that line.
Yeah.
But, I think nature does care about you, but I think nature has so many great metaphors. You can't have a rainbow unless you put up with the rain.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally am struggling. I have this skin thing that popped up in my late 30s called vitiligo, where my pigment is usually really dark tan and it's white, and I have these splotches on my face, and people think I do chemical peels, and I laugh because it's like the last thing I would do, but maybe later. But anyways,
never say never, right?
I look at trees, and some of the coolest trees are discolored and spotted, and some of the coolest animals are spotted, and I just have to embrace myself.
Yeah.
I have to embrace aging, and I have to love myself. Like, nature doesn't judge who you are, what you look like, how much money's in your bank account, if you had Botox or not, whatever, how good of a surfer you are. She really doesn't care. You just have to respect nature. And I think nature provides a lot of answers that you don't necessarily get just doing pro-con lists on a piece of paper.
Right. Totally. One of my favorite chapters in your book is when it all goes haywire. In that moment when Cheryl Strayed's boot falls over the cliff. And you quote Yvonne Chouinard, which I'd like to read for our listeners. It's not an adventure until something goes wrong. So true. Let's talk a little bit about that. about this idea of the rain and the rainbow, because you're absolutely right. Like, you can't get the rainbow without the rain. And do we appreciate the rainbow as much without the rain?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this more and more, and, trying to love the process of all of it, even when it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And in an adventure, something will inevitably go wrong because you're at the mercy of Mother Nature. And despite all of our technology, it's still unpredictable. And there's going to be things that you can't plan for, just like life. But I think it's more fun to sometimes experience in nature because we sort of are more prepped for the fact that something will go wrong, but it makes it easier to plan for those times in life when things go wrong and sort of laugh at them and enjoy them. And I think the key part of this chapter is, for me, humor is my salve. And, even rock climber Alex Honnold uses humor in perilous situations with his climbing partner because humor really eases tension. I've seen big wave surfers do this too. And when I'm out with a group of girls and the waves are scarier for me than I'd like to surf, when one of my girlfriends talks smack to me, it always makes me just less afraid.
Right.
I used to teach surfing to women, and one of the things I would say to them when they were absolutely terrified of bigger waves, especially when we were in a place like Costa Rica or there was a sandy bottom and the water was warm, I was like, just imagine the water when you fall off and you're underwater is giving you a massage, and it's a spa treatment. And I think, nature
the best
teaches
exfoliation
us,
you'll ever
yes,
get.
I was like, nature is just a good reframer. But also, I think in nature, when we're climbing or surfing or hiking, we're not all dolled up. We're often not our prettiest selves, but we are our most authentic selves. When I'm surfing a wave, I often have sand in every orifice. Sometimes if I've caught a really good wave but fallen, my bikini is, halfway up my booty. My lower boob is exposed. I have sunscreen everywhere, and I am in my most beautiful state on the inside. And I might not look aesthetically the most gorgeous, but I'm the happiest. And I think nature's taught me to also reframe beauty, my relationship with beauty. I live in, a town where, and I have family from LA where vanity is put up on a pedestal in a way. And I think nature has shown me that beauty, everybody has something that's beautiful about them, just like there's something beautiful in all of nature to find.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we're in nature, we're not thinking about we shouldn't be thinking about how good we look, right? And nature will force us. In fact, there's this great story of you on the Amazon, and all of a sudden, you brought 3 bikinis, but not a pair of long pants. And in hindsight, maybe that was the best choice. But tell us a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, it was like 2011, and stand-up paddleboarding was fairly new. Still, there was no gear for like paddle pants. There was like 2 companies that I knew of at the time that were making paddle pants. And so I basically just wore like Lululemon capri leggings, which were the style at the time. And it looked cute. And I also brought all these bikinis because we had a photographer along, and I thought we were going to be paddling down these rivers and taking beautiful photos, and I'd look really cute. But the truth is like, one, I was so nervous before the trip that I like put on, whatever. I just was eating peanut butter pretzels by the jar, and I was really strong, and my lower ankles were completely exposed to the element. So even though I'd put DEET and just toxic bug spray I probably would never use now on my legs, they got eaten alive by bugs. I don't know what kind of bugs were in the Amazon, but my ankles and the girl I was paddling with's ankles, they swelled up until they were cankles, and we just laughed. All we could do was make fun at each other and laugh. It was so uncomfortable, so hot, so sweaty, so itchy. I sort of get like PTSD whenever I get a bug bite today. But there is no room for vanity in nature, especially when you're paddling down the Amazon.
Yeah, you get schooled in a way. That's awesome. You've been on some incredible adventures. Do you have a favorite?
in 2013, 14, Johnny and I had been dating, for like not that long. And we decided to move to New Zealand.
Oh, awesome.
I think that was my favorite adventure. We moved to this little surf town called Raglan, where there are lush emerald green pasture hills juxtaposed to this like beautiful sea and perfect waves. And everybody there had like a garden, was very connected to nature. And I was regularly stopped by sheep or cows in the road. And I just felt like that every day there was an adventure. I mean, people in this town that I moved to, especially at this time, are very connected to the land and in nature and adventuring. I mean, even the real estate agent whose house we were renting, his mother's house, and he's like, "Hey, do you guys want to go climbing or caving?" And we're like, "Okay, we'll go to a cave." We didn't even know what that meant. And he took us to this cave the first day that we got there. And first we had to cross a cow pasture where there was this giant bull. And that itself was scary. He had written a note on his car that said like ETA with like the military time. If we're not back, call this number. And Johnny and I looked at each other and we're like, oh, what did we get ourselves into? But we couldn't really say no because we'd already gone an hour out of the way and we were staying at his mom's house. We didn't want to offend the local. And he took us into this cave and it was just magical. It was terrifying. There were holes that we had to climb through called the birthing canal because they were so small and tight that didn't look like you could get through them. And then you got through them. There were these beautiful caverns. And there were glowworms inside.
Wow.
And as a little girl, I didn't have a lot of dolls, but I had this doll that was a glowworm. And you could squeeze this glowworm and it would light up. And I didn't know what that was. But these glowworms were all over in New Zealand. It was like looking up at a sky of stars, but they were like these moving little worms, which sounds disgusting, but
no, it sounds awesome.
It's really cool to see. They're probably like maggots. No, I don't know. They're really cool. And I don't know. They also have this word in New Zealand. It's a Maori word called aroha, which is very similar to the Hawaiian word aloha. And, I think I just learned this really deep love for nature, for each other, for the land. And it was a long adventure. It was an adventure that turned into about 6 months because we kept extending our visa for as long as we could stay in that country. And then we did it again the next year. Eventually I came back and I needed to make some money. So I got a job, but that adventure will always stay with me because every day was just an adventure living there.
Yeah.
Awesome. It was pretty cool.
That's awesome. I love it. Let's talk about your podcast.
All right. Well,
so meta. Talking about a podcast on a podcast.
I know, right?
I love that. It's so funny, Jennifer. So yesterday, we had to leave our house recently for termite tenting. We live in this condo on the beach and it's great, but I was moving some stuff and I found these old columns I had written for the San Diego community newspaper group when I was 19 years old. And I remember at the time in college, I had this journalism professor and he's like, if you guys do one smart thing this summer, you'll go intern at your local paper. They will let you write as many stories as you want. You'll get so many clips. It'll be so good for you. And so I skateboarded down to the Beach and Bay Press, which was in Pacific Beach. And I asked them if I could get an internship there, sent in my resume. They pretty much hired me on the spot. And a couple weeks in, I was like, you guys should have an adventure surfing column. And they literally kind of gave it to me. And I just over-delivered. Awesome. I found this column. It was called Breaking News. And then I changed it to Going Wild. And I covered people who bike across the country, surfed for a cause, broke records. And I think I'd forgotten about it. But many years later, in 2016, I had these PR jobs, I had journalism jobs, and I was ready to blow up my life again and make a change. And I loved podcasting, but I'd only listened really to Tim Ferriss's podcast, which I loved, but I wish he'd interviewed more women and more adventurers because those are the stories I like to hear that and the lens that I like to see the world through. And so I got up the courage. I took actually a test called a Strengths Finder test. I think Gallup provides it. And it kind of showed me that I had a lot of skills that could help me start a podcast. And I was surfing in the water and a friend was telling me about this entrepreneurship accelerator class where day 1, you write your business plan. Week 12, which is the last day of class, you present your business to a team of investors. And I was like, I wonder if I could use that as a springboard to launch this podcast. And I came up with this idea to start a podcast about people who chase wild ideas. It's called Wild Ideas Worth Living. And I ended up partnering with REI Co-op, a store and brand that gets people outside, a beautiful brand who I love working with. They just got some award by Forbes magazine that they're the top company to work for that cares about social and climate justice, which is really cool. And they're good people. They ended up buying the podcast a couple of years later, but it's been an incredible ride. Like, I didn't know anything about the tech side of podcasting. I had zero social media following when I started. I had a lot of background in journalism and a big background in marketing, but there was a lot I had to learn. And part of the podcast process that I loved was that I had to get over being a perfectionist, because you have to release. For me, I was doing a weekly show to start, and I had to
That's a lot.
Produce a show every week. It was a lot. I didn't have time to be a perfectionist, and I had to learn to invest in myself. I had to hire a producer, which meant I wanted to find sponsors to help offset these costs. And it was, the kind of business I could wrap my brain around, and it's been a joy. So I've interviewed all of these people who've done wild ideas, and now REI Co-op owns that podcast. I'm still the host, and I've sort of evolved my interest a little bit. I'm still incredibly interested in adventure, but I'm also interested in the intersection of mental health and adventure. So I also started a new podcast in 2020, 2021 called Vitamin Joy, where I interview people who talk about mental health and humor, because that's something I felt like we'd lost our collective sense of humor as a society. And I think we're getting it back. I don't know. I'm a big fan of joyful shenanigans that are harmless.
I love that. Yeah.
I think they're fun. So that podcast is on pause because, wow, writing a book and publishing a book is a beast. I had no idea what goes into writing a book. But so Wild Ideas Worth Living is presented by REI Co-op Studios Productions. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's really cool. We've interviewed everybody from Cheryl Strayed to, these really cool women. Just so many people that people like Conrad Anker, Alex Honnold, to, let's see, a woman who swam in ice water and broke the ice mile record. This week, there's a woman who ran across Australia to raise money for wildlife. And there's all types of people on the podcast. And I think REI has been really cool. They've been pushing me to interview what the scope of adventure looks like and who belongs in the outside. And their goal is to really make the outdoors more inclusive for all. And it's been cool. It's broadened my horizons, and we've had such a wide range of guests on this year. Podcasting is fun. I'm going to be honest, probably not the best thing to say on a writing podcast, but I do like podcasting in some ways a little better than writing. For me, it comes more naturally. Writing was hard. The screen time was hard.
Yeah.
But there are these moments of just like pure bliss when I write. And there is something pretty special about words on a page.
Indeed.
But I do like the intimacy of podcasting, and I'm really grateful the medium came around when it did, because I always loved the interviewing process of journalism the best.
Same. Yeah. Like, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be an interviewer. I wanted to be Diane Sawyer, if we're honest.
Cool. I wanted to be Barbara Walters.
Nice.
I get it.
Okay. Yeah. And so that didn't happen for me because the path to get my education was long and arduous, and I didn't have the money to afford college, or I didn't have the time to go to college when I had the money because I was working too much. So it took me 10 years to get my degree.
Wow, good for you.
And by the time I graduated, I was like, I don't want to work at a TV station. Fuck that. Like, I'm not that person. I'm not the person who can just go along with what I need to do to get there. If you haven't figured that part out yet, but you probably have, Shelby.
No,
so
I'm not very good at conforming. I get it. Yeah, I'm like you.
So I'm like, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not good at that. So then I went into print journalism, and I loved it. But podcasting, I absolutely love it. I think it's because we have that connection, the interview side. We still are storytellers. So podcasting has been so much fun for Chad and I. I mean, Chad doesn't say much. He's my producer and tech guy, and he makes it all happen. I just talk.
I think what's so cool is you don't have to cut stuff. You don't sound smarmy. Like
Thank
you're
you.
honest. No one's gonna. Well, in podcasting in general, like you never.
A lot
have
of people
to be,
sound that way though.
You never have true, but like in journalism, sometimes you have to. I don't know. You get so many words to tell a story, and then the story isn't really conveyed, or the full quote isn't conveyed, and so things can get lost.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in a podcast, less gets lost. It's more natural.
That's true.
I like that.
And we have more time for it too. I mean, the world is moving so quickly. Like we all have to be there. Like we've got a half an hour to get from here to there. And that time is now spent audiobooks and podcasts. So it's a great way to spend time.
Agree. Totally. And you're good at it.
I have thank you. So are you. I've listened to several of your podcasts and I'm a big fan. I didn't say that in the beginning, but listeners, you're definitely going to have to check out the
All right, enough
Wild
of this
Ideas
love fest.
Worth Living. I know. I can't help it. You find someone who's like-minded and you go a little crazy.
Well, where were you when I was writing my book, Jennifer?
I know.
I really wanted to meet other writers who are adventurers, and it's really cool. I think the one thing about writing a book is it was lonely for me.
Yeah,
And
it can be. It's insular for sure. Yeah.
Podcasting feels less lonely.
Well, I tell you what, we need to be friends for sure. And you need to join my writing community, be part of it. And the San Diego Writers Festival. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the premise is the official podcast of the San Diego Writers Festival. And Edith Eger was at our first festival, actually. I know you interviewed her, which was a very beautiful part of your book. I'm really glad you included her.
She's so cool. So fun fact, I dated her grandson in ninth grade.
That's
Jordan
awesome.
Engel.
Yeah.
And I'd heard her speak at my school when I was in 8th grade and just fell in love with her story. And I remember my mom was like, Shelby, I remember when you came home and you were just blown away by this woman's story of survival and courage. And for those of you who don't know, Edith Eger is this incredible Holocaust survivor who at 91 and 93 wrote books. And she's funny. Like she
Super
told me
funny,
she told me like some like sex advice. It was awesome. And then she said, Shelby, if you do the dishes, Johnny dries. And I was like, okay, that's actually, since then, Johnny doesn't let me ever get away with not drying the dishes when he washes. But she's funny. She's hilarious.
She's got great advice. She probably should have a podcast. Although, how old is she now? She's got to be...
I think she's 93, 94.
Okay. Yeah. She might be older than that.
Maybe you're right.
Yeah. But she's got so much youth and vibrancy in the way she approaches life.
I 100% agree. And, she's taught me that self-love is not narcissistic. It's self-care. And I think a lot of adventurers struggle with, adventure is selfish in many ways, but it's not selfish because it's self-care. And that's like one of those things I really wanted to get across.
You did.
In the book.
You totally did. And there was that. In fact, I was just thinking, I love that part in the book when you talk about that. And I was like, yeah, we have to remember to take care of ourselves first. And I think you said, put your oxygen mask on first.
Yeah, we have to remember to do that.
If we don't, we have nothing left,
Nope.
And if we have nothing left for others, what does that say about ourselves?
Well, I think it's that to pursue a wild idea, it's hard. So to do anything great, it's hard. I'm sure it's hard to have a baby. It's hard to have a long marriage. But if you have a why, which kind of Edith taught me and some others, you will find your how and you will stay in your game. And your why might just be that it's an act of self-love. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's a great why.
Absolutely. At the beginning of this podcast, listeners, I asked Shelby how much time she had. And she said 2 hours. And I was like, oh, well, we won't need that much time. But now I'm like, we could talk for 2 hours, but we're not going to. There's a couple more things. And I didn't even get to half of the questions I wanted to ask you. But I want to talk about TEDxSanDiego. So Shelby is going to be on the TEDx San Diego stage on June 11th at the Conrad Prebys, which is in La Jolla. And tickets are sold out, but you can still get Zoom tickets to watch. And I highly recommend you go get your tickets and join us. I'm going to be there. Everyone should be there. But Shelby, my question is what made you decide to tell your story on the TEDx stage?
Oh, I've wanted to do a TEDx forever. It's funny. I just found a picture. I was at the first TEDx San Diego like 10 years ago. And I think that everybody should pursue a wild idea. I want that idea to get out there. I want more people to connect with nature, to do an adventure. And I don't know, this year's a really unique TEDx San Diego. It's just San Diego speakers.
Mm-hmm. Is that the first year?
It's the first time they've ever done it.
Wow.
With just San Diego speakers. Huh. It's cool. There's really unique people. You know, there's writers who talk about food that have been on your podcast. There's a guy who was sex trafficked as a kid. There's an older gentleman who believes that you should say it now. Tell the people you love them now. It's a diverse range of speakers. And it's funny, I wanted to start meeting other people in San Diego that I might not come across in my own community. I've met all these great people through my podcast, but they're all adventurers. And I've gotten to meet people in biotech and in fisheries and someone who works for the Port of San Diego, all through TEDxSanDiego. So I think it'll be a great event. I went to it last year and Edith Eger was there. It was so fun. And there's also performers besides speakers. So
yeah, it's a full day of entertainment.
I'm so glad you're going to be there. We can hug in person.
Absolutely.
And continue the love fest.
That's exactly right. I'm excited about it. What do you hope people take away? I mean, I think you just kind of told us, but what do you want people to take away from your talk?
I want people to be kind to themselves. It's advice Cheryl Strayed gave me. And she said she doesn't care if her kids grow up to be lawyers or dentists or whatever. She just wants them to be kind. And of course, I want you to go outside and pursue an adventure, big or small, however you want. And I always say this line at the end of all of my podcasts, but, you know, I believe that some of the best adventures happen when you follow your wildest ideas. So if someone tells you you're crazy for doing it, but you know it'll propel your life forward positively, you should do it.
And people did tell you, well, what are you doing? You have a dream job. You're blowing up your life. You know,
people
don't do that.
Yeah, people tell me I'm crazy all the time. And you just have to give them love. Once you have your why and you believe yourself, you'll shush the naysayers who are outside, but also the ones in your own head. And I think if you really believe in your wild idea, most people are kind and they'll support you. But we're living in wild times. And
indeed.
I think we should just be kind to other people and mostly kind to ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think people give us that advice. The naysayers, really, they love us and they're afraid for us.
Exactly.
You know, and they just want us to be safe. But sometimes stepping across that threshold brings you to places that are just amazing. And it's worth taking the risk.
Yeah, you don't get to see the view at the top of the mountain unless you actually climb the mountain.
And damn, is it a good view when you finally get there. That is the best feeling in the world. After you've climbed something just terrifying. And you get to the top and you turn around and it's just this silence, just this moment that is unlike any other. And the world is just perfect. The view is amazing. There's no one there but you and your thoughts. And you're just so proud of yourself that you overcame that fear, did it anyway, and you're going to do it again.
I completely agree with you. I sort of was lost in the thought of like looking at a mountain range.
Let's go. Shelby, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this podcast interview. It was a delight.
Thank you. You're a delight. Yeah, I can't wait to hang out with you.
Me too. Now I got a climbing buddy. I'm not a really good climber, so this is great. You can show me how it's done.
Well, and I'll be honest, I'm never going to get out in the ocean. I'm terrified of the waves. To me, that is the most terrifying thing. Rocks are very stationary. You know, for the most part, they don't move. But the ocean, oh my gosh, it does not sit still.
But La Jolla Shores on a dreamy summer day is pretty gentle.
Well, maybe. You never know. Never say never. You can learn more about Shelby Stanger at shelbystanger.com. Follow her on Instagram at Shelby Stanger and listen to her podcast, Wild Ideas Worth Living. Wherever you get your podcasts, you will love it. This has been another episode of The Premise. Please follow The Premise on Twitter at PodPremise and be sure to subscribe and rate us wherever you do get your podcasts. You know, those ratings make a huge difference and increase the chance that others find us because they need to know about wild ideas worth living too. So let's get the word out together. And of course, the premise is the official podcast of the San Diego Writers Festival. Be sure to subscribe to the festival newsletter at SanDiegoWritersFestival.com. Until next time, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Woo! Ow! That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I swear we really